To understand attributes, we considered an example of usage of ID and class attributes. So we are going to look at it in depth here and discuss another global attribute, the title attribute. So the ID attribute gives your element a unique identifier. In your HTML document, that ID value can only be used in one element. Remember, the ID attribute, you can use the value of this attribute to only one element. So naming rules for ID attribute, first is that it must be of at least one character. Next is that it should not contain any spaces, and values are case sensitive, meaning to say if you use this name here, question with capital letter N, and question here with lowercase letter n, so meaning to say they are not the same. But that does not mean you can define two different IDs that only differ by case, like with this. So they are different and legal, but it would be extremely confusing to do this. So here is an example of naming your ID. So question dash about dash HTML. So remember, if your name has compound titles, so you can use dash. And another example here, HTML dash answer. So where do you use the ID attribute? So ID attribute is primarily used for styling your element. So you can specify the style you want for the element in your style sheet by referencing the ID. So using CSS, which we're going to learn as we progress in this course, you can specify code that will give different styles to, for example, for this ID question about HTML, so you can style purple text, center aligned, and if you use this ID to a paragraph or to other tags, then they're going to have the same these styles that you define for this specific ID, and also with this example. And then the next one that ID is primarily used for is for specifying a link target. So you can link to a section of your HTML page using the ID of the section. So you should reference the ID value with a number sign preceding it for this example. So here is an example. So here you have an ID called introduction, and if you want to link this first example here, so you need to use the ID for this paragraph here. So using the hashtag symbol and the ID here, so it should be the same spelling, of course. And then third, in JavaScript, ID can be used to manipulate an HTML element. So using the ID of the element, you can write JavaScript code to make it perform an action. Example, to change the text within paragraph tags. So again, to review, you use ID for styling your element, specifying a link target, and to for your JavaScript code to perform an action to a specific element.